December 1942, Guadalcanal. Sergeant Takeshi Yamada had survived China, trained his men in the way of the sword, and believed American Marines would break under a proper banzai charge, until the jungle erupted with a sound he'd never heard before. It wasn't the crack of rifles or the thump of mortars. It was a mechanical roar, a sustained chattering that turned the darkness into a meat grinder, and in 30 seconds, half his squad was gone before they fired a single shot. The weapon was a Thompson submachine gun, and the Americans didn't just have a few, they had thousands, pouring 45 caliber rounds at 600 rounds per minute, while Yamada's men clutched bolt-action rifles and 10 rounds each. By the time he was captured and saw the supply depots, the factory output, the sheer abundance of everything from bullets to chocolate bars, he realized something that shattered his entire worldview. So what did a Japanese POW learn in an American camp that made him believe Japan had already lost the war before the first shot was ever fired?
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. December 1941, the world was burning and Japan was winning. From the gray waters of Pearl Harbor to the jungle coasts of Malaya, the rising sun flag moved like a shadow over the Pacific. Singapore had fallen, Manila was next. The Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere was not just propaganda painted on posters in Tokyo, it was real. It was happening, and for the young men in olive-drab uniforms boarding troop ships in Yokohama Harbor, it felt like destiny. Sergeant Takeshi Yamada stood on the deck and watched his homeland disappear into the mist. He was 26 years old. He had fought in China for 3 years. He had seen men die badly and die well. He knew how to move through tall grass without sound. He knew how to clean his Arisaka Type 99 rifle in total darkness. He knew that surrender was worse than death, that the Emperor was divine, and that spirit could overcome bullets if your heart was pure enough. This was not just what he believed, this was what everyone believed. Beside him stood Private Hiroshi Tanaka, barely 19, skinny, eager, his rifle slung too high on his shoulder. Tanaka had never seen combat. He had never left Japan until this morning. But he talked constantly about how the Americans would run, how they were soft, how they loved movies and soda pop and would never fight like real soldiers. Yamada let him talk. The boy would learn soon enough. They all did. The political situation was clear to anyone who read the newspapers. Japan needed oil, rubber, and steel. The Western powers had choked off trade. America, Britain, the Dutch. They wanted Japan to stay small, to bow, to obey. But Japan refused. Japan struck first. And now the empire stretched from Manchuria to the Solomon Islands, and every week brought news of new victories. The economy was strained, yes, rice was rationed, factories ran day and night. But this was temporary. Once the resource-rich southern territories were secured, once the weak colonial powers were driven out, prosperity would return. That was the promise. Technologically, Japan had advantages. The Zero fighter plane could outturn anything in the sky. Japanese torpedoes ran true and deep. The soldiers were trained to march 30 miles in a day, to live on a handful of rice, to fight at night when other armies slept. The Arisaka rifle was reliable, accurate, and every man was taught to make each shot count. There were no submachine guns in the standard infantry kit. Those were wasteful, inaccurate, and used up ammunition too fast. A disciplined rifleman with good aim was worth 10 men spraying bullets wildly. That was doctrine. That was wisdom. That was how wars were won. The transport ship took 2 weeks to reach the Solomon Islands. The men slept in hammocks stacked 4 high. They ate rice and pickled vegetables. They sang songs about cherry blossoms and Mount Fuji. They cleaned their rifles and sharpened their bayonets. Yamada watched Tanaka practice his bayonet thrusts against a canvas dummy, imagining the face of an American Marine, imagining the moment of impact, imagining glory. Guadalcanal was green and wet and thick with heat. The jungle smelled like rot and flowers at the same time. Yamada's company dug in near the airfield the Americans called Henderson Field. Intelligence reports came through every few days. The enemy had tanks, they had airplanes, they had artillery. But they were new to jungle fighting. They were careless. They moved in straight lines. They made noise. They could be beaten. Then the strange reports started. Officers gathered in tents and spoke in low voices. A patrol had been wiped out near the Matanikau River. Another company had tried a night assault and been cut to pieces before they closed to bayonet range. The survivors talked about a sound, a terrible sound. Not the bang of rifles, not the stutter of a machine gun, something else, something faster. One man said it was like a saw cutting through bamboo. Another said it was like paper ripping, but endless. The officers frowned. They checked their maps. They said the men were exaggerating. Fear makes sounds louder than they are. But Yamada heard it in their voices. Doubt. Just a crack, but it was there. A week later, a captured American manual was passed around. Yamada held it in his hands. It was printed on thick paper with photographs. One page showed a weapon he had never seen before. It had a drum magazine, round and fat like a rice barrel. It had a wooden stock and a short barrel. The text said it could fire 600 rounds per minute. Yamada did the math. That was 10 rounds every second. His entire squad carried maybe 200 rounds total. This one weapon could empty their combined ammunition in 20 seconds. He looked at the photograph again. The caption called it a Thompson Submachine Gun. He had never heard of it. Tanaka laughed when Yamada showed him. He said it looked like a toy. He said real soldiers did not need to spray bullets. He said the Americans were afraid to aim. Yamada did not argue, but he kept the manual. He folded it and put it in his pack. On December 10th, orders came down, a dawn raid. The target was a Marine outpost 3 kilometers west. Intelligence said it was lightly defended, 50 men, maybe fewer. The plan was simple: move through the jungle at night, surround them, attack at first light, fix bayonets.
Overwhelm them before they could organize. Yamada had done this before in China. It worked. It always worked. At 3 in the morning, Yamada led his squad into the jungle, 12 men behind him. Tanaka was near the back, breathing too loud, stepping on sticks. The jungle was black. No moon, no stars, just the smell of wet earth and the sound of insects. They moved slowly. 1 step. Wait. Listen. Another step. An hour passed. Then another. Yamada could see faint light ahead through the trees. The outpost. Closer now. 50 meters. 40. His hand tightened on his rifle. Tanaka had his bayonet fixed. The boy was ready. That was when Yamada heard it. Low at first, like a cough. Then louder. Then everywhere. A sound like nothing he had ever known. A mechanical snarl that turned the jungle into thunder. He saw the muzzle flashes before he understood what they were. Lines of light cutting through the darkness. He heard the impacts. Wet, heavy, final. The man in front of him fell without a sound. Then another. Then Tanaka screamed. Yamada dropped flat. The sound kept coming. It did not stop. It did not pause. It just chewed through everything. What was happening? Where were the rifles? Where was the order? There was only chaos, only noise, only death arrived faster than thought. And in that moment, lying in the mud with his face pressed into rotting leaves, Sergeant Takeshi Yamada realized that everything he believed about this war might be wrong. Yamada did not remember crawling backward. He did not remember the retreat signal, or the screaming, or how many men made it out. When the sun came up, he counted heads. 12 men went into the jungle. 5 came back. Tanaka was not one of them. The boy who talked about American cowardice was still out there somewhere, face down in the mud, killed by a weapon he thought was a toy. The survivors did not speak. They cleaned their rifles in silence. They ate cold rice. One man had a bullet wound in his shoulder, the hole small in front and large in back. The medic wrapped it and said nothing. Everyone knew what a .45 caliber round could do. It did not punch through clean like a rifle bullet. It pushed, it tore, it made big holes. Over the next 3 weeks, the pattern repeated. Every engagement was the same. Japanese soldiers would advance, disciplined and quiet, expecting rifle fire they could return. Instead, they met walls of automatic fire that lasted longer than seemed possible. The Thompsons were everywhere, not just officers, not just special units. Regular Marines carried them, entire squads. Yamada saw one Marine carrying 2, one in each hand, firing both at once like some kind of movie gangster. It should have been wasteful, it should have been stupid, but it worked. It kept working. Yamada's company tried a night assault on a supply depot. They got within 30 meters before the Thompsons opened up. The muzzle flashes lit up the jungle like daylight. The noise was so loud, Yamada could not hear his own rifle firing. They retreated again. 4 more men did not come back. After that fight, Yamada was ordered to scout a Marine patrol route. He took 2 men and moved carefully through the hills above the coast. They found a spot where the Americans had stopped to rest. The Marines were gone, but they had left things behind. Yamada approached slowly, expecting a trap. There was no trap. There was only trash. He knelt and looked through it. Empty tin cans, peaches, pineapple, beans in tomato sauce, a chocolate bar wrapper, the paper still shiny, cigarette butts, American brands he had seen in magazines before the war, a discarded field jacket, still clean, no holes, just thrown away like it was nothing. Yamada picked up one of the cans. It was heavy. He shook it, still half full. They had eaten some and left the rest. He thought about his own rations, a ball of rice, dried fish if he was lucky, sometimes nothing. He had lost 15 pounds since landing on Guadalcanal. Every Japanese soldier had. They were supposed to be used to hardship. That was part of the training. Suffer more than the enemy and you will outlast him. But the Americans were not suffering. They were eating canned fruit and throwing half of it away. One of the men with Yamada found something else, a backpack, also abandoned. Inside were spare socks, dry and clean, a small folding shovel, a poncho, 3 boxes of ammunition, .45 caliber, 50 rounds per box, and at the bottom, wrapped in oiled cloth, a Thompson Submachine Gun. The weapon was scratched and dirty, but perfectly functional. Yamada picked it up. It was heavier than his rifle. The barrel was short and thick. The drum magazine was still attached, half full. He turned it over in his hands. This was the thing that had killed Tanaka. This chunk of American steel. He pulled the bolt back. It moved smoothly and solidly. He looked down the barrel. Clean, well made, simple. There was nothing elegant about it. It looked like something made in a hurry, stamped out of sheet metal and screwed together. But it worked. That was all that mattered. The Japanese Type 100 submachine gun was supposed to be better, more refined, more carefully crafted. But Yamada had never even seen one. They were rare, issued only to paratroopers and special naval troops. The Americans had these Thompsons by the thousands, maybe tens of thousands. He did not know the exact number, but he could guess. Every patrol he saw carried them.
Every defensive position bristled with them. Japan built beautiful weapons for elite warriors. America built ugly weapons for everyone. Yamada took the Thompson back to camp. He showed it to his lieutenant. The officer examined it carefully, then handed it back without a word. What was there to say? They all understood now. The war was not what they had been told. It was not spirit against spirit. It was not discipline against chaos. It was an industry against scarcity. It was a factory in Detroit against a workshop in Nagota. And Japan was losing. 2 weeks later, Yamada's unit was ordered to attack a Marine encampment near the beach. The goal was to destroy supplies and disrupt their operations. They moved in before dawn, 2 full companies, nearly 300 men. It should have been enough. They crept to within 100 meters. The signal came. They charged.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The Thompsons opened up before they covered 10 meters. Then the machine guns joined in. Then mortars. The attack collapsed in minutes. Men fell in rows. Yamada hit the ground and crawled toward a fallen log. He pressed himself flat and tried to become invisible. The firing went on and on. He could smell the gunpowder. He could feel the heat of the bullets passing overhead. He waited for a gap in the fire, some moment to retreat. It never came. The Americans just kept shooting. Then Yamada heard the engines. He lifted his head and looked back toward the beach. Trucks were arriving. Big trucks, American-made, painted green. They stopped near the Marine camp, and men began unloading crates. Yamada watched through the smoke and dust. The crates were stacked 6 high. Some were marked with red letters he could not read. Others had pictures. One showed a bottle, Coca-Cola. He knew that logo. He had seen it in Tokyo before the war, in the fancy districts where rich people went. Now it was here, on a battlefield, being unloaded by the truckload while men were dying 100 meters away. Another truck pulled up. More crates. These ones were long and wooden. A Marine cracked one open with a crowbar. Inside, packed in straw, were Thompsons, new ones, still in grease. Yamada counted 12 in that single crate before he had to duck down again. 12 Thompsons in one box. How many boxes were there? How many trucks? How many ships bringing more? He thought about the warehouse in Osaka where his rifle had been made. He had visited it once before the war. It was a small building with maybe 50 workers, each one hand-fitting parts, checking tolerances, polishing wood. Beautiful work, careful work. They made maybe 100 rifles a month. He looked at the American trucks again. They were unloading enough weapons to equip an entire division, and they did it like it was nothing, like there was more where that came from, like the supply would never end. A piece of shrapnel hit the log near Yamada's head. He flinched. When he looked up again, the trucks were gone, and the firing had stopped. The attack was over. He crawled backward until he reached the jungle, then stood and ran. He did not look back. He did not count the dead. He already knew. That night, sitting in a muddy foxhole eating a handful of cold rice, Yamada understood something that made his chest feel hollow. Japan was not losing because Japanese soldiers were weak. Japan was losing because America was a machine that made war the way other countries made rice, and no amount of courage could stop a machine. The bullet hit Yamada in the leg during a skirmish near the Longa River. He did not feel pain at first, just pressure, like someone had kicked him hard. Then he looked down and saw the blood spreading dark across his trousers, and he knew. He tried to stand, but his leg buckled. The man next to him grabbed his arm and pulled him behind a fallen tree. The Thompsons were still chattering somewhere close, too close. Yamada raised his rifle to fire back, but his hands were shaking, and his vision kept going gray at the edges. Then the firing stopped.
He heard voices, American voices, boots crunching on leaves, getting closer. The man who had pulled him to safety was gone, retreated into the jungle. Yamada was alone. He thought about the pistol in his belt. He thought about what he was supposed to do. But when the Marines appeared, 3 of them with their Thompsons pointed at his chest, he just sat there bleeding and did not reach for the gun. One of them kicked his rifle away. Another knelt down and looked at his leg. The Marine said something in English. Yamada did not understand the words, but he understood the tone. Not angry, almost gentle. The Marine pulled out a bandage and wrapped it around the wound, tight, stopping the blood. Then they lifted him up, 1 on each side, and carried him back toward their lines. Yamada waited for the bullet, for the bayonet, for whatever Americans did to prisoners. It did not come. They took him to a tent with a red cross painted on the canvas. Inside was a doctor, also American, who cut away his trousers and cleaned the wound, and gave him an injection that made the pain fade to something distant and soft. The doctor said words Yamada did not know. A nurse brought water in a metal cup. Yamada drank. It was cold and clean, and tasted like nothing he had tasted in months. He drank 3 cups. They kept him in the tent for 2 days. They changed his bandages. They gave him food. Not rice. Bread. Soup with actual meat in it. An apple, red and shiny like something from a painting. Yamada ate slowly, waiting for it to be taken away. But no one took it. They just brought more. On the 2nd day, a Japanese-speaking American came and asked him questions. Name, rank, unit. Yamada answered. What else could he do? The man wrote everything down on a clipboard, thanked him politely, and left. That was it. No torture, no threats, just questions and a clipboard. A week later, they put him on a ship. He was below deck with maybe 30 other Japanese prisoners. Some were wounded like him. Others looked healthy but broken in different ways, their eyes empty. The ship sailed for days. No one told them where they were going. Yamada expected to be thrown overboard once they were far from land. Instead, they were given blankets and food twice a day. Canned stew, crackers, once chocolate. A man near Yamada cried when he ate the chocolate. He said his daughter loved chocolate before the war. He had not thought about her in months. Now he could not stop. They landed in New Zealand. Then they were moved to Australia. The camp was behind wire fences, but the barracks were dry and solid. There were letterings that flush. There were showers with hot water. Yamada stood under the hot water for 10 minutes, just stood there, feeling it run over his skin, washing away months of jungle rot and mud and death. He had forgotten what it felt like to be clean. The guards were polite, firm but polite. They did not hit, they did not scream. They followed rules. Geneva Convention, they said. Yamada did not know what that meant, but he learned quickly. It meant prisoners were treated like humans. It meant 3 meals a day. It meant medical care. It meant mail, though Yamada had no one to write to and no one who would write back. November 1943, Thanksgiving. Yamada did not know what the word meant until the guards explained. A holiday, a day for being grateful. The prisoners were served turkey, a huge bird roasted brown and sliced thick, mashed potatoes with gravy, bread rolls with butter, green beans, and pie. Apple pie with a crust that flaked apart when Yamada pressed his fork into it. He stared at his plate. It was more food than he had seen in a single meal since leaving Japan. He thought about his mother. He thought about his sister. He wondered what they were eating today. He knew the answer. Millet. Maybe sweet potatoes if they were lucky. Probably less. Probably much less.
The guard who served the food noticed Yamada staring. The guard smiled and said something about seconds, about coming back for more if he was still hungry. Yamada looked around. Every prisoner had the same full plate. Every guard had the same full plate. There was no difference. No special officer portion. No one went hungry so someone else could eat. Just food. Enough for everyone.
more than enough. Yamada ate slowly. He tried to remember the last time his stomach had been truly full. He could not. Even in Japan before the war, there had always been a little hunger, a little holding back, a little making do. Rice was expensive. Meat was rare. You learned to be satisfied with less. But here, in a prison camp, on an island thousands miles from home, he was eating like a rich man, like a lord, like someone who mattered. After the meal, Yamada was assigned to work. They needed men to help in the supply warehouse. He was given gloves and told to unload trucks and stack crates. He agreed. What else would he do? Sit and think? Better to work. The warehouse was bigger than any building Yamada had seen in his village. The ceiling was high and the lights were bright, and the shelves stretched back further than he could see clearly. He began moving crates from a truck. The first one was heavy. He checked the label. Thompson SMG, 1,000 units. He stopped, read it again. 1,000 in one crate. He set it down carefully and looked around. There were dozens of crates just like it, hundreds maybe. He did the math in his head. Thousands of Thompsons, tens of thousands, just sitting here in one warehouse, in one camp, on one island. He moved another crate. Ammunition, 50 caliber, 10,000 rounds. Another crate. Medical supplies, bandages, morphine, sulfa powder. Enough to supply a hospital for months. Another crate. Boots, size 9, 200 pairs. He kept working. He kept counting. The numbers stopped making sense. They were too big, too impossible. During a break, Yamada sat on a crate and drank water from a canteen they had given him. Another prisoner sat next to him, an older man from Hokkaido. The man said he had worked in a factory before the war. He said he understood machines. He looked around the warehouse and shook his head. He said this place held more war material than all of Japan produced in a year, maybe 2 years. He said America was not fighting a war. America was practicing, like a rich man playing a game, spending money it would never miss, building things it did not even need, just because it could. Yamada said nothing. There was nothing to say. He thought about the Arisaka rifle he had carried. Beautiful, precise, made by hand, one at a time. He thought about Thompson. Ugly, simple, stamped out of sheet metal by machines that never slept. He thought about spirit and discipline and all the things his officers had told him would win the war. He thought about the turkey and the pie. He thought about the crates stacked to the ceiling, more weapons than he could count, more food than he could eat, more of everything than Japan had ever had. That night, lying in his bunk, Yamada took out a small notebook they had given him. He wrote in Japanese, small characters, careful and slow. He wrote, "We were told the Americans loved comfort more than honor. We were told they would break. But I have seen their supply depots. I have eaten their food. I have counted their bullets. They do not break because they do not have to. They have enough of everything, enough to waste, enough to give to prisoners. We were not defeated by weak men. We were defeated by a country that fights with its factories. What is courage against 10,000 Thompsons? What is honor against a warehouse full of everything you do not have? I believed we would win. I was a fool." August 1945. The war ended with 2 flashes of light and the voice of the emperor on the radio, telling his people to endure the unendurable. Yamada heard the news in the prison camp. The guards gathered the prisoners and explained through an interpreter. Japan had surrendered. The war was over. Some men wept. Some sat in silence. One man tried to hang himself with his belt, but the guards cut him down and took him to the hospital. Yamada felt nothing.
He had known for years. The ending had been written long before the bombs fell. He had read it in the supply warehouses and the crates of Thompsons and the plates of turkey that never ran out. That night, lying in his bunk, Yamada took out a small notebook they had given him. He wrote in Japanese, small characters, careful and slow. He wrote, "We were told the Americans loved comfort more than honor. We were told they would break. But I have seen their supply depots. I have eaten their food. I have counted their bullets. They do not break because they do not have to. They have enough of everything, enough to waste, enough to give to prisoners. We were not defeated by weak men. We were defeated by a country that fights with its factories. What is courage against 10,000 Thompsons? What is honor against a warehouse full of everything you do not have? I believed we would win. I was a fool." August 1945. The war ended with 2 flashes of light and the voice of the emperor on the radio, telling his people to endure the unendurable. Yamada heard the news in the prison camp. The guards gathered the prisoners and explained through an interpreter. Japan had surrendered. The war was over. Some men wept. Some sat in silence. One man tried to hang himself with his belt, but the guards cut him down and took him to the hospital. Yamada felt nothing. He had known for years. The ending had been written long before the bombs fell. He had read it in the supply warehouses and the crates of Thompsons and the plates of turkey that never ran out. They kept the prisoners for 3 more weeks while arrangements were made. Then they loaded them onto ships. Yamada stood on deck as they sailed north. Other men talked about home, about seeing their families, about rebuilding. Yamada said nothing. He had a small bag with his few possessions: the notebook, 3 pencils, a bar of American soap he had saved, a pack of cigarettes, unsmoked, 2 Australian coins. That was all. That was everything. The ship docked at Yokohama in early September. Yamada walked down the gangplank with the others. The port was damaged, but still standing. Beyond it, he could see the city, or what was left of the city. Entire blocks were gone, burned down to bare earth. Buildings stood like broken teeth, walls without roofs, roofs without walls. The smell of ash was still in the air, even though the fires had been out for weeks. People moved through the rubble like ghosts, thin and slow, wearing clothes that hung loose on their bodies. Yamada caught a train heading south. The train was crowded, packed with soldiers and civilians and people who might have been either. Everyone was quiet. The countryside rolled past the windows. He saw fields that had not been planted. He saw villages with half the houses missing. He saw children with old faces watching the train pass. In Australia, children looked healthy and round. These children looked like they were made of sticks. The train stopped in Osaka. Yamada got off and walked toward his neighborhood. It took him 2 hours, because so many streets were blocked or simply gone. He recognized nothing. The school where he had studied was a pile of bricks. The shop where his father had bought newspapers was a black square on the ground. He kept walking. Finally, he found his street. The house was still there, damaged but standing. The roof had a hole in it covered with canvas. The front door was crooked on its hinges. He knocked. His mother opened the door. She looked at him for a long moment without speaking. She was 20 years old. Her hair was completely gray. Her cheeks were hollow. Her hands were like bird bones. Then she made a sound, something between a cry and a gasp, and pulled him inside.
The house was mostly empty. The furniture was gone, sold, or burned for heat. The rooms were cold, even though it was summer. His mother made tea with leaves she had used 3 times already. There was no sugar. There was barely any flavor. They sat on the floor because there were no chairs. She told him about the war, about the air raids, about his younger brother Kenji, who had been sent to the Philippines and never came back, about his father who had stopped talking after they received the notice, about hunger, about eating grass and acorns and being grateful for it. Yamada asked where his father was. His mother pointed to the back room. Yamada stood and walked slowly to the door. He slid it open. His father sat on the floor, staring at the wall. He did not turn when Yamada entered. Yamada knelt and said he was home. His father still did not turn. Finally, the old man spoke. He said Yamada had brought shame. He said a soldier does not surrender. He said a Japanese man dies before he allows himself to be captured. He said Yamada was no longer his son. Yamada bowed. He said he understood. He said he was sorry. He stood and left the room. His mother touched his arm but said nothing. There was nothing to say. This was how it would be. Yamada stayed in Osaka. He found work at a school that was trying to reopen. They needed teachers. Most of the young men were dead. Yamada could read and write and had finished middle school before the war. That was enough. They gave him a classroom with broken windows and 30 children who had not eaten breakfast. He taught them reading and math. He did not talk about the war. But sometimes, after class, a student would ask. They had heard stories. They wanted to know if America was really so terrible, if the soldiers were really demons, if the bombs were God punishing Japan for losing. Yamada would think carefully before answering. He would tell them that Americans were not demons. He would tell them that the bombs were just bombs, made in factories, dropped from planes. He would tell them that Japan lost because it ran out of everything, while America had more than it could use. He would tell them that bravery was not enough, that spirit was not enough, that you could believe with all your heart and still be wrong. The children did not always understand. How could they? They had grown up being told that Japan was special, chosen, destined to lead Asia. Now they lived in ruins and ate sweet potato vines and watched American soldiers hand out chocolate in the streets. The world had turned upside down, and no one had explained why. In 1955, Yamada took a train to Hiroshima. He had read about the memorial they were building. He wanted to see it. The city was still mostly flat. They were rebuilding slowly, block by block, but the bomb had erased so much that it was hard to know where things had been. The memorial stood near the center, a concrete dome with the metal frame exposed, left as it was after the blast. Yamada stood and looked at it for a long time. He thought about the Thompson Submachine Gun. He thought about the crates in the warehouse. He thought about the turkey dinner and the hot showers, and the trucks unloading supplies while men were dying 100 meters away. The atomic bomb was just the final lesson in a class Japan should have learned years earlier. America did not win because it was more cruel or more evil. It won because it built more of everything. More planes, more ships, more bullets, more food, more medicine, more of whatever was needed whenever it was needed, without ever running out. Japan had prepared for a sword fight. America had brought a factory. And when you bring a factory to a sword fight, the factory wins every time. Yamada reached into his pocket and took out one of the Australian coins he had kept. He looked at it. I turned it over. Then he tossed it into the offering box at the memorial. A coin from the other side of the world, from a prison camp where he had eaten better than he ever had at home, from the place where he had learned that everything he believed was a beautiful lie. He walked away from the memorial and caught the train back to Osaka. He had students to teach tomorrow, children who needed to understand that the world was not what their grandfathers had told them, that power came not from spirit, but from steel, that honor without resources was just another word for losing, that sometimes the greatest courage was admitting you were wrong before everyone you loved paid the price. Thompson had taught him that. Not the bomb, not the surrender. Thompson, the ugly, simple, mass-produced weapon that killed Tanaka and 10,000 others like him.
The weapon that was not special or beautiful or made with care. Just effective. Just enough. Just more than Japan could ever answer. And in the end, that was all that mattered.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.